We were 16, an age where you feel invincible. It was summer and school was out, and my friend and I, who lived in the same apartment complex as me, decided to go to the mall and kill time as any other underage teenager would do. I don't remember much about that day other than our walk home from the mall. It must have been around 9 when we left, since that is the time the mall closes. Our apartment building was 2 miles away from the mall, so of course we walked. It was hot out and we both knew once we got home there would be nothing to do, so we opted to walk home. We enjoyed the conversation and the passing of time. Our town wasn't exactly dangerous. Yeah, there were muggings and theft, but it wasn't as bad as other cities in our country where rape and unsolved murders were commonplace. So we walked those 2 miles oblivious of any potential threats. We were a mile in when we passed an intersection. Shortly thereafter, 3 males walked out of the opposite street and began walking behind us. I didn't think much of it. It's summer. They were young. It's hot. No reason to be suspicious. My friend, however, was unnerved. Hey, yeah, those guys behind us. What about them? I'm pretty sure they are following us. What? No, I don't think so. You're just being paranoid. As soon as I'd said that, one of the men started whistling at us. I turned around.
What do you got in the bag?
Nothing, leave us the fuck alone, my friend retorted. I remember being pissed. Why would she respond to them? At this point, I am nervous as fuck. Turns out my friend was right. Called intuition. We begin walking faster now that we sense danger, and as we quicken our pace, so do the men. They know we're onto them. We near a plaza with a Del Taco, and as we enter the parking lot, the men disperse. One is directly behind us and the other 2 are on our sides. I turn around. They all whip out fucking metal baseball bats out of nowhere. At this point, I turn to my friend and we hightail it to the Del Taco, not bothering to turn around. Thank God it wasn't too late or they'd be closed and we'd have nowhere to hide. As soon as we enter the Del Taco, we look out the windows and witness all the men jump into a Cadillac Escalade that was parked. Were they only scaring us? Why the bats? Why the car? What the fuck is going on? Do I call my dad to pick us up, or do we walk the half a mile home? We didn't want to worry our parents, and so we decided to walk. The whole time we are constantly turning back, anticipating a black Escalade to pop up out of nowhere and kidnap us. But it never did. As soon as we get home, we promise ourselves not to tell our parents as it would hinder us from hanging out again. The moment I walked through the door, I babbled to my parents. I later found out that my friend did the same. Scariest experience of my young life. This is my first Reddit post, and I'm sorry it's so long, but there's a lot of backstory here. I've never really been one to post anything this personal on the internet before, but I think it's time to finally make these feelings known that I could never admit to a therapist. Not to toot my own horn or anything, but I am generally a kind young woman that tries my best to see the good in people and just try to make it out through life with friends instead of connections. But this woman, this sick fucking woman, almost changed my outlook on everything. Just some backstory. My father was once married to a very kind, funny, and religious woman. They had around 7 kids. He later cheated on her. They divorced and he remarried a fellow veteran. Another sweet, kind, and funny woman. That was my mom. They had 2 kids together, including me, making me the youngest of 13 people, with the oldest for now being around 42. Unfortunately, he cheated on my mother with another woman. We'll just call her M. I know very little about her now. Before, I just thought she was another nice woman that my father liked. But she was different from the others. She had a past that I still don't know, and she started showing her true colors as a sick, violent, manipulative fucking psychopath. They would be together for a while, which later had my father divorce my mother. It wasn't too hard on me because I knew about the affair, and it would even be a discussion over dinner between just me and her. After they divorced, my mom even mentioned that they high-fived outside the divorce office and got some ice cream. So, all seemed well. My parents divorced, my father was happy, my mom had a job she was comfortable with. All seemed well, which is always when the shit hits the fan. Sometimes me and my siblings would stay at my father and M's house. All would be fine, but if there was ever an argument between Dad and M, things would get scary. At first, it would be some strained talking, later yelling. After M starts yelling, we would go to either the rooms or the basement. The yelling would turn to screaming, which is when Dad would come upstairs and take us home. But I would still see the knife marks on his neck. M was abusive. The stupid thing about my dad is he would go back to her. Cut to years later, Dad was still with M, but my grandfather on Dad's side passed away from cancer. Dad needed to find a job to take care of my grandmother down in Texas, because we all lived in Wisconsin. This didn't sit well with M, but she did have to live with it. After a while, she went down to Texas with my dad when he invited her to stay. That never sat well with me, but if my grandmother was there, maybe it would be fine. I still don't know what went down in Texas. After a long time, I never saw Dad. Sometimes we would get phone calls, so that was enough for me. But the day that I will always remember, the day my father passed away. It was just a week before my 16th birthday. He was driving to work to the college. Unfortunately, a drunk driver was driving on the wrong side of the highway and head-on collided into my father's vehicle. Both drivers died on impact. I remember my mom waking me up, and when she sat on my bed, I knew something was wrong. The day was so quiet because there was nothing to say. Mom knew that we had to go down to Texas for my own father's funeral. We packed up and made the long drive from Wisconsin to Texas. It was the worst funeral I've ever gone to. It was run by M. She made the funeral start 5 minutes ahead so his own kids were 5 minutes late. She got rid of the VIP seats for his kids. The pastor turned the funeral into a sermon instead of focusing on his family. Nobody knew we were his kids, and to kick us all while we were down, there was a charity for his kids, known as Officer Blake, father of 9 children. People were donating, but M didn't tell us about it. We found out about it around a month after M claimed the money. She got every last penny that was supposed to go to his kids. Mom had to quit her job because it was 8 months behind on payment. My dad was gone. 2 of my siblings were going to college. I still had 2 more years of high school, and my mom had to take care of me and my 3 older siblings with no job. She later had to work 3 jobs just to take care of me and for tuition for my brothers. After a few years, my mom finally got a great job, which was ironically the same building my father used to work at as a police officer in Wisconsin. I'm in college now with my father's passing slowly going behind me. I wasn't even thinking about him until just last week. I was on spring break and my mom and I decided to go to a mall. We were talking about Dad and she told me something I'll never forget and never forgive. My father would get many surgeries for his knee. One day, while living with M, he couldn't move because of the surgery and he needed to give my mom a check for child support. Because of how awkward it would be to have Mom go over there with M in the house, Dad asked if she can go out between 1 and 3 p.m. M wasn't happy with that. While my dad was bedridden and couldn't move, she actually pinned him down and choked him. My own father, who was stuck in bed and was being choked by a woman he married. She was arrested but was paid bail and Dad still went back to her. Hearing that made me cry the whole drive there. It also made me swear vengeance on her. I wish to find her and let her know that family is not just a name. It's not just who you were born with, it's who you would die for. If she knew that, then she would have never fucked with mine. I'm sorry if this brought you down at all. I just wanted people to know this story and to let you know, just because your parent likes them, you need to make sure that person isn't some psycho. You need to do whatever it takes to protect not only your parent, but to protect your whole family. A lot of people are saying we should have pressed charges against M for the charity. The thing is, M was legally married to my father, so she was able to get everything. And even though the charity was meant for his kids, it wasn't professionally run. It wasn't by the Red Cross or anything similar. It was run by a couple of people that thought they were doing the right thing. which they were, but M found a loophole and bent the rules in her favor. Also, I now know where she is. She is in the same state and close to the same county as I am, now working at some dinky truck stop. There really isn't a reason why I should pursue an answer from her now. My mother has a great job, I'm close to my dream career, and one of my brothers is graduating from basic training. We have moved on, and you know what they say, karma is a bitch. One more thing. I never mentioned on why I'm the youngest of 13, even though I only mentioned Dad had around 7 kids with his first wife and 2 with my mom. My mother also married before Dad. They had 2 kids, but Mom had to leave him after he abused her for a couple of years. I know I say youngest of 13, but my father's past is a mystery. Who knows? I could have a twin in Russia. So, I used to be a CNA at a hospital in Missouri. Our general job description is to take vitals at specific times, document input and output, and then just help patients with whatever they need. But occasionally we have to be a sitter for someone, which usually means the person is being crazy or on suicide watch and needs to have someone with them at all times. Being a youngish and relatively average-looking female, I've had my fair share of creepy and weird hospital patient stories. I've been bitten, kicked, groped. But this particular story is probably a moment that actually made me realize that people can be terrifying creatures. The hospital I worked at was hit by a tornado in May of 2011, and sometime after our behavioral health facility was relocated to a much more secluded area very close to the border of Missouri and Kansas, though only a few miles from town. I'm talking, you could see all the stars outside and hear coyotes in the distance. It seriously felt like the scene of a potential horror movie during my smoke breaks outside there. I worked overnights, and though I usually work cardiac, I was called over to behavioral health to be a sitter. I was a little creeped out just because of all of that. I remember thinking, what would we even do if the power went out? I get to work, and upon receiving a report on the patient, the daytime tech tells me this: I honestly don't know why he even needs a sitter. He is so nice and polite. He calls me ma'am and held the door for me. He did sort of get into a fight with another patient, so that's why he has to have a sitter. But the other patient started it, and he isn't even here anymore. You're gonna have an easy night, girl. So I sit next to the guy and try to relax. I honestly wasn't that worried about being in the men's area, because generally the women's ward is much more known for causing trouble and violent outbursts. Also, in Missouri, most patients are just bipolar or schizophrenic and off their meds or drug addicts, and people admit themselves because they can't afford the help they need. The guy really was super nice. He was totally polite and asked about my tattoos. He enthusiastically showed me the bear he had tattooed on his arm. As time passed, the night continued to be relatively uneventful, and as bedtime came, the guy got in bed and went to sleep. In his room, I situated myself on the floor, in the corner near an outlet so I could read my Kindle with my back against the wall. Keep in mind here that while I had worked at the hospital for a while, I had only worked in behavioral one other time and never really got the kind of training that psych techs get, like how you're always supposed to walk behind everyone so your back is to no one and such safety measures. We did have alarm buttons that clipped onto our scrubs, but they were apparently pretty flimsy, because when I took lunch at around 3 a.m. I noticed mine on the floor, slightly under the patient's bed. The guy slept fairly well until around 1 a.m. Around that time, he started to wake up and just sat in his bed staring at me. I didn't want to appear nervous, and I wasn't really allowed to leave his room anyway, so I would just tell him the time and suggest that he still had some time to sleep before breakfast. He had such a weird blank expression on his face, and he would stare and then ask if he could call his parents because he had some things he needed to discuss with them. I would just reiterate the time and tell him he could call in the morning. Around 3 a.m., I took my lunch with the nurse who was assigned to my patient. While we were eating, she told me she couldn't believe I was brave enough to sit in his room, all things considered. I asked what she was talking about and said he only needed a sitter for fighting another patient, so I wasn't really worried. That's when the nurse proceeded to tell me that the man was admitted because he kept threatening to murder his parents. The incidents kept escalating from him making telephone threats to bringing a gun to dinner with them, until finally they brought him in when he started leaving corpses of violently slaughtered animals on his parents' doorstep. She told me that when they went into his trailer, there was a bunch of gutted and dead animals in his home, and there was blood and feces smeared all over the walls. So, I don't know if the daytime girl knew all of that, but I definitely had myself cornered in this guy's room, in the spot literally the furthest place from the door, with an alarm button that had fallen off of me half the night anyway, with a guy showing so many serial killer symptoms, and I was told he only needed extra care because another patient had initiated a fight with him. I'm a 24-year-old girl, but at the time of this story, I was about 16 and my younger sister was about 14. We were living in a pretty bad neighborhood, along with my mom, just the three of us, as my 4 older brothers had moved away and my dad had passed away 3 years prior. The house we lived in was old and kind of in bad shape, but we kept it very clean on the inside. It had its benefits though. It came with a huge backyard. I'm talking one full backyard complete with a garage-sized tool shed right at the edge of our short, metal fence, and on the other side of the fence was a large, unfenced plot hole of land that also belonged to us. We called it the Back 40. Now, my mom is not mentally all there. She has the mental and emotional capacity of a 15-year-old girl, but she is so stunningly beautiful. Few people notice. She was also a bleeding heart, meaning basically, she was very trusting and wanted to save the world, while also not making very smart choices and honestly putting her tiny little self in danger, as well as me and my sister, a lot. One of the people she constantly tried to save was her best friend, Karen. Karen was your typical white trash, hardcore, drink a fifth of cheap vodka in the morning type of alcoholics. She'd show up at our place hammered a few times a week, sometimes for money, sometimes to hang out, and sometimes to steal the change off my dresser. You get the idea. Well, one day she shows up with a camper and a borrowed truck. She tells my mom she needs somewhere to keep it because her new husband kicked her out. I immediately think it's a bad idea. It looks like it hasn't been touched since the 70s. It probably has rats and it's probably stolen. But my mom, the bleeding heart, says fine, you could park it behind the shed. I agree because then it won't be an eyesore, at least. Mistake number 1. She parks it between the metal fence and the back of the shed, so just the very end of it and the hitch are visible from the front of the shed. We all kind of forgot it exists for a few months. Then one day, our cousin abandons a puppy at our house. It's a pit bull and it takes to us immediately. We love him unconditionally and he loves us back just as hard. We don't even mind that he barks at anyone walking by or any new people in the house. He usually barks, sniffs, then loves them anyway. We begin to feel kind of safe at the house, a feeling I hadn't had since the last of my brothers left home. A few months later, it's summertime and my mom is teaching summer school, so my sister and I are home alone. It's about noon and we decide to go sunbathing in the backyard. We toss on our bikinis, grab towels and lay out in the sun, reading and talking, bonding like only a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old can. But I start to feel uneasy. I start to feel like I'm being watched. I don't know why, but I just get the feeling we should go inside. My sister is a very nervous girl sometimes, prone to crying and breaking down when she's spooked, and I don't want to alarm her in case it's nothing, so I just tell her I'm hungry and we should go inside. She agrees quickly and I can tell she's rushing as she grabs her stuff. Fuck, she feels it too. Probably doesn't want to seem like a baby though. We basically run inside the house. My sister asked if I felt like I was being watched. I say yes. We have a creepy neighbor who is in love with my mom, Karen's ex-husband, who sometimes creeps around the woods next door. My sister says maybe it's him. Normally I'd agree, but I knew he was currently in jail for arson. I start to get freaked out, and then out of the corner of my eye, I see a flash of a man near the old camper behind the fence. It's so far away and he moved so quickly, I didn't get a good look. My sister sees it too and freaks out. Our pit bull is too short to see out the window, so he sits calmly at our feet. My sister calls his name and, thinking quickly, lets him out of the back door. He goes bounding out, catching the scent of an intruder. Our view is blocked by the shed, but we lock the back door and crack the window, and we watch and listen to him barking viciously. A man's voice saying something, then more barking and a struggle, and then nothing. We can't see what's going on, but we were freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I run around and lock the front door, double check the windows and snap the back window shut. We can't see what's going on, but we're freaking out. I tell my sister to find the house phone. She runs upstairs to look for it. I run around and lock the front door, double check the windows and snap the back window shut. I still can't see my dog, and now I can't hear anything either. My heart is pounding. This kind of neighborhood, the cops take hours to come. I'm struck with the memory of calling 911 when my dad collapsed. Before I knew it, he was dead as soon as he hit the floor. A massive heart attack, telling the operators my dad was dying. It took them an hour to show up. What could some man do to us in an hour? I'm so scared, because above all else, I love my sister. I grab a steak knife from the counter and hide the rest in a drawer. My sister comes bounding down the stairs, already on the phone, telling the operator what's going on. I tell her to go sit in the living room, try to see if the neighbors are outside, maybe flag one down. All of a sudden, our dog comes bounding around the side of the shed, happy as a clam. I could see the back door from the window, and I check to see if it's clear. It is. He reaches the back door the same time I do, and I let him in, slamming the door shut behind him. My sister comes running in, and we both examine the dog to see if he's been hurt. What we see at that moment still makes me nauseous to think about. We look at each other, embarrassed. I don't know what to say. I don't know if my sister is old enough to know what we're looking at. We're silent until she breaks quiet. Is that cum on his face? I throw up in the sink. That answers her question. I lift my head from the sink and out the window. I see a man jump the fence towards the back 40, away from us, and take off running into the woods that neighbor our house. My sister, still on the phone, doesn't mention what we found on our dog's face. Out of embarrassment, out of fear, maybe because she was scared to admit that she knew what cum looked like. I don't know. Those are the reasons I don't mention it to the cops who show up 45 minutes later, though I'm assuming her reasons were similar. The cops thoroughly checked the woods, but the guy was long gone. They checked the shed, but it had obviously not been entered in years. Finally, they checked the camper. Someone had been living in there for a while. Clothes, CDs, a CD player, dog toys, food, needles, and other drug paraphernalia were found inside. The dog toys explained how the guy was able to calm our dog long enough to mess him. He was a sucker for a raw bone or a plushie toy. Police said it was a harmless drifter looking for a place to live and told us to get rid of the camper. We did, that day. I'd like to say my mom learned a lesson, but she didn't. I did, though. My sister is tougher than I thought, and she was probably ready for the sex talk. Psychopath may be a strong word to use, but he was truly terrifying. We went to a university together. In fact, we had our first official class together where we became friends. I always thought he was a little off and short-tempered, but who wasn't at art school? We were friends, but not good friends, just the same circle of friends. Fast forward 3 years, I start seeing him as a handsome, sensitive artist. I am only a few weeks away from going away for the summer, and he talks to me about how much he will miss me and how he is afraid I won't come back. A few nights after he comes over and sits on my bed, just hanging around, then it comes out that he is falling in love with me. Little did I know he played the same act on all my friends, but I was the only one that fell for it. I reciprocated and it was official. The first date in, he tries to have sex. I keep saying no, over and over, but he keeps trying, then starts with the guilt trips. It has been so long for me. It hasn't been for you. You date guys all the time. It's like you were showing a full glass of water to a man who is dying of thirst. I explain that I am on my period, but he still insists not only on sex, but going down on me first. I am disgusted, but saying no just won't work. I even tried to fall asleep, but he was determined. So he did his thing, but when we were trying to have sex, he had no idea what he was doing. I asked if it was his first time and he got really depressed. I didn't want you to know, and I guess it won't be my first time yet. When I went away, our relationship was still young, so it was difficult to see through him. Every night we would video chat, and every night he would turn it into cyber sex. It was to the point as soon as the camera turned on, he was already going at it. I wanted to see him and decided to go halvesy on a plane ticket. He said he would pay me when he arrived. That didn't happen. When he got there, I was so happy. I was staying with my father, so I wanted to respect his house rules as much as possible, but, let's call him Dave, didn't seem to care much about respect. He instigated sex every night. Even if I wasn't interested, he would find a way to guilt me into it. Not long before he leaves, he buys throwing knives, throws them at my dad's house and loses one. I laugh as we try to find it, thinking it in good fun. He loses his shit, starts flailing his arms around and screaming, teary eyes, holding his head in his hands, cursing over one little knife. I came home feeling not so in love, but scared almost, without knowing why. Then I try spending less time with him. He didn't like that. He would freak out and make me feel terrible about myself. Sometimes he would just break things and throw them, never at me, but to the wall just over little things. On top of that, we were having sex every night. Most nights I actively told him I didn't want to, but he would guilt me in or start while I was asleep. I woke up to that several times, and each time I screamed at him, telling him it wasn't okay. He would just plead ignorance, thinking I was awake and just not opposing or moving. If I managed to fend him off for 2 or 3 nights in a row, the temper tantrums would start, throwing things, screaming, breaking things, slamming doors, throwing his whole body onto the bed or floor. I was terrified of him. At this point, I tried to break up with him a few times, but he would just guilt me into self-loathing. My friends didn't believe anything I told them, that I was just making excuses, that I just couldn't commit, and he didn't deserve to be mistreated. I constantly had a yeast infection due to the non-stop sex. No matter how much it hurt, he would demand it. He used my medical ointment as lube. He demanded that he put it on for me, which usually led to a fight about sex. I was never able to shower or change alone, or without having to please him in some way afterward. He refused to use condoms and never came during sex. His stamina was too great. He masturbated at least 10 times a day, more if he had the day off. Sometimes if I would deny him with enough strength, he would begin humping the air and then masturbate furiously with an evil, murderous look on his face. My cat would always try to get in my room. My latch was broken, so he would usually get in. When he did, Dave would pick him up and throw him out the door once or twice at the wall, no matter how many times I yelled at him. One day I bought Dave a fish. My cat was captivated and poked a hole in the bag. I walked in on Dave strangling my cat while it scrambled in desperation. I screamed at him. It was the last straw. A few days later, I confronted him and explained to him I couldn't take it. The breakup went surprisingly well, but his roommate told me he purposefully suffocated and starved the fish I gave him. I would come home to him sitting on my bed staring at the floor for quite a while, then shaking his whole body, springing onto his feet and walking to my roommate's room. This happened on a fairly regular basis up until I moved. About a month later, I had to visit his roommate, who said he wasn't around. He was just in his room and his roommate didn't know. He poked out and saw me for a second and desperately asked me to come talk to him. He looked mad, so I said I would rather not, but he started yelling and guilting me, making me look like an ass in front of his roommate. So I went to him. He said he wasn't taking it well, usual post-breakup stuff, but he sounded more furious than sad. His roommate said he didn't go to work, didn't leave his room for a week after I spoke to him. A few months after, he asked if I wanted to get coffee with him. My friends all encouraged it. I had someone know where I was and where I was going. The conversation was a bit creepy, but normal. When it was done, I said I would walk him home, so he wouldn't find out where I lived. He just continuously insisted he walk me home. Even when I kept trying to leave him, he kept following me. So I walked faster, hoping it would make him clue in that I was uncomfortable. Alas, he followed me all the way home, but didn't know which apartment I was in. He asked desperately for a hug, hugged me anyway and wouldn't let go. His squeeze was tighter and tighter. I kept pulling away. He would pull me back. I would say, okay. He still wouldn't let go. It felt like a solid 10 minutes. Thought it probably wasn't, but I just felt terrified, especially since now he knew where I lived. After that, his roommate told me he locked himself in his room for 2 weeks. I didn't seem to see him after that unless it was at a social gathering, where he would just stare at me for a very long time. I remembered him saying he would never go back to his hometown under any circumstances, so that is where I was going to move. Shortly after I moved, he got wind and sure thing he moved there too, so I never went out alone. I didn't see him often at all, but when I did he would stare and stare, so that didn't make me any less scared. I still feel sick thinking about him. I could definitely see him being a real serial rapist in the future. He now teaches English in Korea. Hopefully he will stay there. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. So I'm going to start the powwow off here a little bit different here, just because whenever I'm narrating a subject as sensitive as domestic violence, I always feel it's the right thing to do to give a shout out to all my subscribers and to everybody that's listening. And I always say, if you are a victim of domestic abuse or becoming a victim of domestic abuse, please call the number that I leave up on the screen right here. And the best thing I can do for you guys that are becoming a victim of domestic violence is to reach out my hand to spread awareness more and help all of you out. So please, call the number up on the screen, and I'm pretty sure there are people that want to help you out just as much as I do. So anyways, how's everybody's day going today? I think I literally spent the whole day editing and watching Breaking Bad. I have watched this show before. I've watched all 5 seasons in a row on TV, but for some reason it's always that one show that I constantly go back to. I don't know if it's because I got a thing for Bryan Cranston and whatnot. By the way, speaking of Bryan Cranston, man, how awesome would it be if that guy narrated a story? Seriously, I mean, that guy's voice and enthusiasm and the way he acts, that's fucking awesome. Speaking of which, too, how awesome would it be if he was Lex Luthor in Batman v Superman? Come on. Like, perfect casting choice right there. Lex Luthor, this really stern businessman. Missed opportunity in movies, my friends. I feel like whenever I do these powwows, I'm either bashing Batman v Superman or bashing the DC movies that are coming up. I promise that won't be a common occurrence in these powwows, but anyways, guys, I really hope you guys enjoy the video, and just remember, the best ideas always come out of nightmares.